The bloated bureaucracy is a big concern for conservatives. They say the federal bureaucratic state has become so huge that it is now a de facto fourth branch of government, and in fact, maybe the most powerful branch. As Paul Strand reports, experts will tell you it's completely unconstitutional.
If there's one thing the Founding Fathers cared about, it was liberty. And the last thing they would have wanted was an unelected bureaucracy that could steal your property, your rights, and even your freedom.
It's fifth grade civics all over again, right?
Law School Assistant Dean Richard Kelsey says those Founding Fathers were clear and deliberate about what they'd allow constitutionally.
They took a lot of time trying to figure out how to get this right. Remember, we had the Articles of Confederation first. Didn't work. So we got together, had a constitutional convention, and we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how do we make this delicate balance of power.
The founders decided only the politicians in Congress, those closest to and most easily held accountable by the voters, could make the laws that would reign over and even threaten those voters.
They're supposed to make the laws, propose the laws, be answerable to the people, and the president is not a lawmaker. His job is to either say no to this law or yes to this law.
But the unceasing cancerous growth of the executive branch's bureaucratic agencies has upset this careful balance and made unelected bureaucrats super powerful.
They're like a fourth branch of government now, and they are unaccountable. They're unanswerable to the voters, and they can get away with just about anything they want without any consequences.
And that's allowed modern presidents to basically take the law into their own hands. And President Obama has made this his forte, unconstitutional though it may be.
In this meeting is the fact that we are not just going to be waiting for legislation in order to make sure that we're providing Americans the kind of help that they need. I've got a pen and I've got a phone, and I can use that pen to sign executive orders and take executive actions and administrative actions that move the ball forward. And I've got a phone that allows me to convene Americans from every walk of life, nonprofits, businesses, the private sector, universities, to try to bring more and more Americans together around
what he's doing now is he's saying, hey,
theme.
Congress isn't working. It's not doing what I want. I'll go around Congress. Nothing allows him to do that. It's not even being hidden anymore. The president has come right out and said, if the Congress won't act, I will act. And he's doing it through these bureaucracies.
And now they literally wield life and death power over people.
They are issuing regulations often with criminal penalties. That's something only Congress should be able to do. And yet these unelected bureaucrats have the ability now to declare that certain actions will potentially land you in jail. That's how powerful they've become.
And in many cases, to be penalized, you don't even have to know you were guilty of disobeying these regulations, which are now basically a new type of law.
The famous saying is ignorance of the law is no defense. But that's before we started making hundreds of thousands of laws every year. In fact, lawmakers are ignorant of the law, right? If you remember from the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, they said we have to pass it before we know what's in it.
And even though Republicans have begun talking about reining in some of the regulatory agencies, critics warn the power of the bureaucrats has been growing for years, and Capitol Hill didn't stop them.
Congress over the years has delegated too much of its power to all of these administrative agencies.
So now you have essentially a shadow government in these federal agencies that is running our country, that's determining how the IRS enforces its tax regulations, how the EPA affects your land and your property and your business.
We are empowering this huge federal government that can restrict our liberties, restrict our freedom, restrict our economic opportunities in this country, and it's almost impossible to fight back against these agencies.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Effort. A number of people from outside of the Pentagon, political appointees, were flowing into our office, and they were working Iraq issues. These political appointees that we had came from a very small set of think tanks.
As Eisenhower said, the military-industrial complex is really three components. There's the military professionals, there is defense industry, and there is Congress. There is now a fourth component, and that is the think tanks.
You know, one of the little-known secrets of Washington is that policy isn't really generated very much within the policy apparatus. A great number of the ideas come from outside the government, from various think tanks, like the Project for the New American Century.
Saddam Hussein, here's the man, here he is in his box. I wouldn't exaggerate the influence of the Project for the New American Century. It's a very small think tank, but in some respects we argued for, I suppose you might say, elements of the Bush Doctrine before the Bush Doctrine existed or before George W. Bush became president.
The group included principals like Rumsfeld, but it also included a large number of people more or less unknown to the American public.
And these people all know each other. They had all worked together before the Bush administration.
The terrors. Our report on rebuilding America's defenses said even before September 11th, the defense budget was too low. It looked ahead to the kinds of wars that we've now ended up fighting in Afghanistan and in Iraq.
What think tanks do is come up with new rationalizations and new threats. That's what they're paid to do.
Iraq under Saddam Hussein was a terrorist state. I think Iran is a terrorist state.
This was almost completely adopted by the administration, in part because the people who wrote this had all been brought into the administration.
We must prevent the terrorists and regimes who seek chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons from threatening the United States.
It is not at all accidental that when the President names our enemies in the 2002 State of the Union message in the Axis of Evil, that it includes Iraq, Iran, and North Korea.
So in a real way, we have this new phenomenon where think tanks are now an integral part of what we used to think of as the military-industrial complex.
The Federal Reserve's decision to print more money and try to stimulate the economy has a lot of people in Washington crying foul. You can't do that again.
So should the Fed really have so much control over the American economy? Joining us now is Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano with a historical look at this based on the Constitution and what it says.
You know, George Will argued over the weekend that the Fed is like a fourth branch of government, and it's a good argument to make. Think about it. The job of the CIA is to steal and keep secrets. We know far more about the CIA than we do about the Federal Reserve. Its members are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, yet it's a private bank that makes its own money, regulates the economy, and can print money. The federal government doesn't print money. The Federal Reserve prints money. It's not federal, it's not a reserve, it's a private bank. So what the heck are we doing with it? And why is it flooding the market with cash?
Yeah, exactly. It's not they, the Federal Reserve, and Ben Bernanke. They're not really accountable to anybody, are they?
They make the president, and they'll do this to any president, look good. Look at how the stock market went up last week when Ben Bernanke announced that soon he's going to start buying $40 billion worth of federal bonds.
Every month.
Every month.
Forever.
Translation, he's going to create out of thin air $40 billion in cash and put it in the accounts of the federal government. That is more cash chasing available for the same amount of goods and services. Answer, inflation. And what goes up first? The things we use the most. Fuel, food. Brian, sorry to tell you, beer. These things skyrocket. When the Fed floods the market.
Why wasn't I told about the beer? It's not anywhere on the card. But you said you can bring this back. You know exactly really what the forefathers thought about this. Thinking about what the framers have written, how would they feel about it, the valuing of the dollar?
They wrote a law in 1792. Okay, the country is 4 years old at this point, called the Coinage Act. And it said, whoever shall debase the dollar, whoever shall do anything to the dollar to make it worth less than what it appears to be, shall suffer the penalty of death.
It is mid-September. which is an ideal time to observe Constitution Day in Washington, D.C., the three constitutional branches, legislature, executive, judiciary, are back from their summer breaks. They are regrouping and laying plans for a new season of checks and balances.
What's going on is quite simply the consequence of a Supreme Court that is rewriting the Constitution. It is the consequence of the living Constitution. It is a consequence of the Constitution that changes. And the Constitution for whose changes the court is responsible. Once the people figured out that that's what's going on, and it took them maybe 30 years or so to figure that out. The people aren't stupid, and they say, "Well, we used to look for good lawyers, somebody with a modicum of judicial demeanor, an honest person, all this stuff." That's not the most important thing anymore. This court is rewriting the Constitution. I should pick somebody who will write the new Constitution that I like.
That is the Constitution a living document, open to interpretation, or is it something that must be read strictly and adhered to regardless of the day?
Scott, that is the question that is asked constantly of judges. There are some things in the Constitution that are black and white. You can't, except during times of war, the government can't quarter troops in people's homes. Now, even in that black and white situation, what is the meaning of quartering troops? If there is some sort of war effort going on in the United States, and the government knocks on your door and says, our guys have to go in there for an hour and re-provision themselves or use your bathrooms or do something like that, the courts may be asked, is that quartering troops? Is that a constitutional violation? There's always that sort of twist in what happens. And then there are provisions that are very general in the Constitution. You can't have an unreasonable search and seizure. What does unreasonable mean? What's a search and seizure? On those three words, search, seizure, and unreasonable, law books are filled. Shelves and shelves of them are filled. And so to talk about strict interpretation or living Constitution, those are not words I use. And they're not words that I think have much meaning, because what you are doing is interpreting new facts to an established law that in part has been given meaning and precedent, and that in part has a historical background. And you're drawing from all of that toolbox of precedents, history. Some of my colleagues don't rely on history, but others do. And from statutory construction principles. It is not about reading words strictly or about living Constitution. It's about giving meaning on the basis of facts that are presented to you.